On April 2, 2025, the world watched as President Trump, in a move reminiscent of his 2016 campaign promises, signed an executive order implementing a sweeping 10% tariff on nearly all imports entering the United States. The stated goal was simple: to protect American jobs and industries from what the administration deemed unfair foreign competition. Trump, in his characteristically blunt style, declared this the dawn of a new America First economic revolution. This decision sent shockwaves across the global markets. It signaled a stark departure from decades of established trade practices and raised serious concerns about a potential trade war. The immediate impact was felt most acutely by American consumers, who saw prices on everyday goods begin to rise. Economists warned of the potential for inflation and a slowdown in economic growth. However, the Trump administration, seemingly undeterred, doubled down on its rhetoric, arguing that any short-term pain would be offset by the long-term benefits of a resurgent American manufacturing sector. The international community wasted no time in responding to Trump's aggressive trade move. China, the world's second-largest economy and America's primary economic rival, immediately retaliated with tariffs of their own, targeting key American exports like soybeans and automobiles. The European Union, Canada, and Mexico, all major trading partners of the United States, also announced plans for retaliatory tariffs. Beyond the immediate tit-for-tat tariffs, there was a palpable sense of uncertainty and unease that gripped the global markets. The International Monetary Fund warned of the potential for a global recession, and businesses around the world began to brace for the worst. This uncertainty was further compounded by the Trump administration's unpredictable nature. No one could say for sure what the next move might be, and this lack of clarity had a chilling effect on investment and trade. The response to Trump's tariff policies was not confined to the halls of government and the boardrooms of multinational corporations. On April 5, 2025, millions of people around the world took to the streets to express their outrage at what they saw as reckless and irresponsible economic policies. From the streets of Washington, D.C. to the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, protesters carried signs with slogans like "Trade wars create no winners" and "Dump Trump, not our economy." These protests were not just about economics. They were also a reflection of the deep-seated anxiety and anger that many people felt about the direction of global politics. The rise of populism, nationalism, and protectionism, embodied by leaders like Donald Trump, was seen by many as a threat to the liberal world order that had been painstakingly built in the aftermath of World War II. The scale and intensity of these protests took many by surprise. It was a stark reminder that in the interconnected world of the 21st century, the actions of one nation, even one as powerful as the United States, have far-reaching consequences. Within the United States, the political climate was just as heated. Democrats, who had long criticized Trump's economic policies, seized on the tariffs as evidence of his incompetence and recklessness. They argued that the tariffs would hurt American consumers, cost American jobs, and do nothing to address the underlying problems in the American economy. Republicans, on the other hand, were largely divided. Some, particularly those representing districts heavily reliant on manufacturing, supported the tariffs, arguing that they were necessary to protect American jobs. Others, however, expressed concerns about the potential for a trade war and the impact that it would have on the American economy. This division within the Republican Party was indicative of the larger political divide that had come to define American politics in the Trump era. It was a divide between those who embraced Trump's nationalist populist message and those who clung to the traditional Republican values of free trade and limited government. Section 5. Elon Musk, the lightning rod of controversy. Adding fuel to the fire was the controversial figure of Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur who had taken on a prominent role in the Trump administration as the head of the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency. Musk, a vocal supporter of free trade, found himself in the awkward position of defending the administration's protectionist policies. In a series of tweets and public statements, Musk attempted to walk a fine line, arguing that while he personally favored free trade, he believed that the tariffs were a necessary negotiating tactic that would ultimately lead to a more favorable trade deal for the United States. This explanation, however, did little to appease critics who accused Musk of hypocrisy and of selling out his principles for a seat at the table. Musk's high-profile and controversial statements made him a lightning rod for criticism, both within the United States and abroad. Protesters in Berlin targeted a Tesla showroom, defacing cars and holding signs that read, "Musk equals Trump." The incident highlighted the global reach of the backlash against Trump's policies and the way in which they had tarnished the reputation of even those who were seen as tangentially connected to the administration. Section 6. Trump's response, a familiar refrain. As protests raged both at home and abroad, Trump remained defiant. In a series of tweets and public appearances, he dismissed the protesters as losers and haters, and insisted that his tariff policies were working exactly as intended. He argued that the United States had been taken advantage of in trade deals for too long, and that it was time for America to start winning again. This rhetoric, while familiar to those who had followed Trump's career, did little to calm the waters. If anything, it seemed to further inflame tensions both domestically and internationally. The world watched with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief as the leader of the free world seemed intent on starting a global trade war. Section 7. Economic fallout, a looming crisis? The economic consequences of Trump's trade war were swift and severe. The stock market, which had been enjoying a period of record highs, plunged into a tailspin, wiping out trillions of dollars in wealth. Businesses, facing uncertainty and rising costs, began to scale back investment and hiring. The agricultural sector, which relied heavily on exports to China, was particularly hard hit. Farmers, already struggling with low commodity prices and rising debt, found themselves caught in the crossfire of a trade war that they had no part in starting. Many feared that they would lose their farms if the trade dispute continued. The economic pain was not limited to the United States. Countries around the world, particularly those with close economic ties to the U.S., began to feel the pinch. The global economy, which had been showing signs of recovery after years of sluggish growth, was once again teetering on the brink of recession. Section 8. The human cost of trade wars. Beyond the abstract numbers and economic indicators, the trade war was having a very real impact on the lives of ordinary people. In the United States, workers in industries affected by the tariffs began to lose their jobs. Families struggling to make ends meet found their budgets stretched even thinner as the price of everyday goods began to rise. In China, farmers who had lost their export markets were forced to sell their crops at a loss or leave them to rot in the fields. Factory workers, facing layoffs and wage cuts, worried about how they would provide for their families. The human cost of the trade war was a stark reminder that economics is not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It is about people's lives, their livelihoods, and their hopes for the future. Section 9. The uncertain future of global trade. As the trade war dragged on with no end in sight, the future of the global trading system hung in the balance. The rules-based order that had governed international trade for decades was under threat, as countries increasingly resorted to protectionist measures to protect their own interests. The World Trade Organization, WTO, the body tasked with regulating international trade, seemed powerless to stop the slide towards protectionism. The Trump administration, skeptical of multilateral institutions, had repeatedly undermined the WTO, leaving it weakened and ineffective. The trade war marked a turning point in the history of globalization. It remains to be seen whether this will be a temporary setback or the beginning of a more profound shift towards a world where countries turn inward, prioritizing their own narrow interests over the common good. One thing is certain, the stakes could not be higher. The decisions made in the coming months and years will shape the global economy and the international order for generations to come.